It's everyone's favorite time here at Quantum TV because to the left we have the Hisense U8QG 55-inch variation. To the right we have the Samsung S90F 55-inch variation as well. I'm blown away. I did this comparison with this particular example before I recorded it and I'm freaking floored. Okay, let's just dive right in, okay? It's like basically the color like cyan, right? Like this right here, pause right here, okay? This is where Samsung shines. To the right, you're going to have all of the rich nuances between the bluish green kind of color that you would have on an ocean. It just looks very realistic. To the left, you're not really going to have that to that strong effect. However, if you pay attention to the color of the boat, the skin tone of the girl, the color of the dress, all that's like identical. And so that's where you should get your first tip off that this is going to be really amazing, okay? And then when you look at the details, like the details of the hair, it's amazing. Now this year, Hisense has something called AI Super Resolution. And I'm only using medium right now, not even high. And it just does an amazing job of giving OLED level detail, is really the only way you could say it as far as like the brighter scenes like this. Obviously on those near black scenes or those completely black scenes, OLED is going to have the advantage. However, this is closer than any LED has ever been to this level of picture quality. Again, you have to use all the tools at your disposal in order to pull that off. So we're going to continue. And I want you to pay attention to look at the water. I mean, obviously, very clearly, right? A win for the Samsung for the color of cyan a bit. They have that in the bag, at least with that part. Because if I rewind, which I don't know why they make me do it this way, but it is kind of stupid. We'll work with it. But I want you to pay attention to this example when she's underwater, okay? Not just here, but right about here. This is where the whole comparison from this point forward shifts. Now, what you're going to notice is there's clearly a brightness advantage on the Samsung S90F. It looks way brighter, and that looks amazing. However, Hisense is giving you that color quality, that richness, and it still does have brightness. It can be brighter, by the way, obviously, than the Samsung S90F with up to 5,000 nits. However, if you want to maintain richness and purity of picture quality and color, I don't advise doing that. You have to tone it down a bit. And as far as optimization, this is where it's at. I think this is where you're going to see the peak performance, not blasting it off with the highest level of peak brightness. That's where you're going to start to lose picture quality, albeit this is where I'm telling you, it's where you see all the details. So pay attention. You'll see all the clarity of the water, everything. This is where it starts to look a lot more like OLED, and even better if you look at the blackness, the shadows. They're darker here than they are over here, where that's just really bright. And it actually does look like that to my naked eye, where I could clearly see where that clearly has the weaker shadow than the QD mini LED right here. And you have the weaker color gradients where that, again, or rather here you have the stronger ones, where here you have the weaker color gradients. And again, you don't have as much detail in the water at the top here as is rippling, where here you have all of that detail as it ripples. And that effect just looks amazing. You see more of the shiny water reflections in her dress, where here not so much, which is surprising given the global brightness, or rather full screen brightness, is brighter in this example. It's just brightening everything up, but it's not giving you that refinement of detail. So that's just the first image, okay? Now we're going to go to the next image. Pause right here. Here, they're nearly identical. Hisense obviously has a little bit more in the way of richness again, and richness is just that depth in your color where it's a deep, pure, rich, punchy, dark color that's it's pure. I mean, there's no other way to say that, where Samsung is, again, slightly over brightened where it doesn't need to be. Now, again, you can try to correct this on the Samsung, albeit your images are going to be vastly less impressive. So if we go into the brightness and we start lowering our contrast from 46 and we try to lower it down to try to get it to compete, I mean, you're going to have to really go down. I don't think I would want to be lower than 35 or 34. I'll leave it at 35. You get an idea of what you're dealing with here. It's still over brightened. I think that's the thing with Samsung this year. They really want you to believe that the brightness is everything, but it comes at the expense of picture quality. Where Hisense, you have so many tools and options as to how you want to lay out your picture, and you get better results as a result. And you're clearly seeing it here. I mean, you still have those blistering highlights that are to die for. You still have the staggering brightness. They look alike for like right here. They look very identical. I mean, really, they're gorgeous TVs. I will say that there is a slight edge to the S90F for this particular comparison, but if we pause right here, right? I mean, pick a winner. It's kind of I look at Hisense and I'm seeing the better picture on the Hisense. On the Samsung, I am seeing a little bit more in the way of detail. Obviously, it's an OLED, so that's what OLEDs are known for. But the fact that I'm kind of like, I'm not gonna lie, if I were like at a glance gonna look at one and say which one I would rather have, it would be the Hisense picture, because I have more detail retained in the foliage of the leaves here. I have more detail retained in the shadows and in the color of her hair and in just all the nuanced things that I like. Like, I mean, just look at the leaves in the background to foreground separation. It's just stronger here, and here not so much. Again, you see that leaf, it's very bright, but that's all it is. It has no detail. And again, don't misread this. You can brighten up the Hisense. I mean, but again, why would you want to if you have a better picture quality without it being at its brightest setting? That's the thing that I want to drive home for you guys. So we're going to continue with this comparison, okay, by showing you just, again, in motion, how it looks. The red on the Hisense to die for, Samsung not so much in this example. They look identical here. Again, identical in this frame. And when you get to a point where they're starting to look very identical, I mean, just pause right here. You really have to start pausing these frames to pull out these details. Like now, obviously the Samsung has more contrast. I can see that here clearly. There's a lot more depth in the dress. There's a lot more depth in her three-dimensionality. All the grass, all the blades of grass, very clear. Her hair color has a more natural color. Looks very, very good, where this is falling behind a bit. So there are clearly going to be some processing differences, and there are going to be some differences as far as how the image is rendered. In motion, are you going to stop to pick out all those differences? That's the thing. The difference is there, and I will tell you it's there, and the win for this particular slide or comparison between two images is going to be for the Samsung on this example. And then you continue forward, and then it'll switch. Like now, I love the color of the red on the Samsung or on the Hisense. I think it looks beautiful, but the detail on the Samsung is to die for. I mean, if you look at it, either way you look at it, they both look like great TVs, right? I'll try to run that back. Again, I hate how fast it moves sometimes, because you're trying to see something and you gotta go back in and you gotta pause, and then the frame only lasts like a second. All right, let's get it right about here, okay? There are some differences to point out between these two images, regardless of what YouTube shows you. For starters, Hisense in this particular example is going to give you the higher level of contrast. The detail that you're getting on the Hisense is just higher. If you look at her hair, you might be able to see it, maybe you might not. I just see that there's just a lot more of natural three-dimensionality to her hair. It just looks a lot more detailed. Her colors are more popping here, richer shades of blue, skin tonality, and everything like that. We're over here. Her skin tone, not quite as impressive, but it still does look like a really good picture. And again, it's going to come down to your preference as to how much brightness you prefer. Honestly, looking at both are stellar. I wouldn't really say that I would want one over the other because of the strength of both. However, in this particular example, I would give the skin tones to the Samsung, but I would give the overall picture quality to the Hisense over here, because it's just doing a lot more, I feel. But both are stellar, so it's like it's hard to pick a winner when both are literally stellar. Okay, so now let's consider putting up something else on the screen, since with this, they're about identical. As you can clearly see, there's an edge in one area versus another, here or there, give or take. But you can clearly see that they're both exceptional. So now let's move on to our next category and show you what we came up with there. I figure it'd be best to start with the Spears & Munsell UHD benchmarking disc, just to give you an idea of what both look like. I'm gonna go ahead and turn down the music, just because I don't need any copyrights. Though I will say it was on like 13 or something, so we still heard some good sound. A sound test to come later on. Right now there is a win for the Samsung, a little magenta on the Samsung here, but it still does look pretty good. Again, both look good though. And that's the thing. How much picture quality can you give up? I think that's the question that we're having here between OLED. Well, again, especially considering the price difference. I know around Black Friday, the Samsung will be a little less. It should be in the $1,100-ish price range, versus the Hisense, which will probably be around the $699 to $899 price range, depending on how you find it in the sales cycle, or the hot deal cycle or whatever. You know what I mean? Like when they're going on sales, blowout sales. Now, I will say for this example, the Samsung now is showing where it has a lot more characteristics of being an OLED, because now you're noticing every fine detail of snow, everything. A Hisense not really doing it like that. Again, Keep in mind the Hisense is not rocking its full brightness. The Samsung is on like 35 brightness, so neither are on their full brightness. But the reason I wanted to do it this way is just to kind of show you what's up. I mean, the detail coming off of the freaking Hisense right now, though, I prefer way more over what I'm getting on the Samsung. In this pause frame, I see way more detail and like everything. It looks a little green on camera, but in real life, it doesn't look like that at all. There's no green to it at all, and it just looks amazing. The same can be said about on camera. This is looking a bit more magenta, where in reality, I don't see that at all. So again, the camera is hypersensitive to hues. So again, green and red, it's going to pull very sensitively to those areas, which is why I'm telling you what I'm seeing here. It just looks beautiful with my naked eye, and I have way more detail on the Hisense, and it feels like the OLED in this comparison. If we pause right here, though, we can see where the color advantage does tend to go towards the Samsung S90F. I'm seeing a lot more detail, a lot more color, and it does look beautiful. However, the color and the detail on the Hisense right there. It's literally right there. It's just a hair behind a little bit, but it looks phenomenal. Not as much detail again as the QD OLED, but I mean, come on. I mean, and we can see it here as we look at the gradients in the sky. We can see like you're not having as much of that OLED quality, obviously, because it's not an OLED. And this is where you can see it, where things just look crystal clear. The S90F is giving that to you for sure. I do like the image to the left on the S90F, just a little bit better for this particular example. I think they're about a tie for this one. Again, be mindful, the Samsung is going to look more magenta on camera, so you're going to have to work through that by listening to what I'm telling you. But if I pause right here, there's a massive, massive difference in terms of shadow detail. I'll open up my brightness. Hopefully you can see it. Don't know if you can or can't. I think right about there is where it actually is. Again, the Hisense is going to look really green. I don't know why it's looking like that on camera. Hope that's not what it actually looks like when it actually translates to a YouTube video. But yeah, it looks really green here, and that's not at all what it looks like. I can tell you though that it looks brilliant, man. I have all the shades, all the colors, all the everything, and it just is truly like a sight for sore eyes. But the Samsung too, they both look good. And that's the thing here. You're going to be battling yourself trying to find the better TV between two absolute monster TVs. The Samsung has the higher brightness here coming in with a lot more brightness than what the Hisense is offering you. But if we pause right here, this is where it shifts. So I'm going to put the ISO back down to where it was. And it's clear. It is very clear that the Hisense just is doing something for color. The Samsung is just not in terms of this cyan representation, the color of the lava, the detail in the lava. It all looks immaculate. Where I can say that the color orange is better here, though. You see a lot more of the in between shades of orange, the darker shades to the lighter shades, where this doesn't have as much. But the overall impact, like when you first look at it, bam, right in your face, the Hisense is taking that win every day of the week because that shit just looks so good. But there is something to be said about the Samsung. It just is also doing a good job, just not as good as what we have over here on the Hisense for this particular example. So do keep that in mind. It just looks magical on the Hisense is all I could say. But the Samsung also, they both look, I mean, look, they both look good. And again, you're going to be kicking yourself trying to figure out which one is going to be a better TV, because I'll tell you right now, these are champions right here. Absolute champions. Right now, I would say the image to the left is more realistic with the Hisense, but the right is more appealing. Again, this is highly subjective at this point, because now we're really splitting hairs between like what I think looks better and what is better. And honestly, it's going to be up to each individualized person's opinion, because like right now there's more shadow detail to the left on the Hisense U8QG, but to the right there is just more vibrancy and contrast. So it's really like you got to pick what you like. And honestly, I would probably lean between somewhere in the middle between both these TVs. I don't think either is doing it wrong though, and I think you'd be happy with either. Though I will say, if I'm being honest with myself, I prefer the look of the QD OLED to the right. I think that's where you're going to have the better image. This is a slam dunk for QD OLED right here. This is where you're seeing the biggest difference, where again, you just don't have that on the QD Mini LED. And it's freaking amazing how close, I would say, that this is getting to such a flagship premium experience. And again, when you look at these two images side by side, it's clear there's a color advantage on the Samsung S90F. Again, you see that with the rocks, you see that with the color of the rocks, but Hisense is not falling that far behind at all. I mean, like, these images are starting to look kind of identical, with Hisense just a little bit behind. Now, if I had to say it, like, even like for water, like right now, if you look at the cyan in the water, that now looks better. So again, it's not all examples of water where Samsung's just going to take the cake. So don't hear that and think, oh, it's a slam dunk, because look, you're seeing it right here. As far as black levels go, the black levels are exceptional on the Hisense, but Samsung is obviously taking the cake. That QD OLED color quality and detail is not rivaled at all. But if you don't want to spend that money on QD OLED, or you're nervous about QD OLED, well, now you have your answer. But really, if you look at the colors in the feather, it's very clear that the accuracy and the detail of this cannot be touched by this. This looks amazing, but that is next level. It's mind-blowing to look at all of this and see how this is all playing out. I do see a bit more, I would say, bloom now around the Hisense, where I can notice it trying to light up that red. I can notice it trying to light up that cactus a bit more. And again, I'll open up my camera sensitivity to light, or ISO, so that hopefully you can see it. I don't know how far I need to raise it. We're already quite high and I still can't really see it, but hopefully you can see it. There's a glow that'll happen around here and around there, and I can actually see that in the content. So do keep that in mind, that that is there. Even though the ISO is relatively low at this point, I'll try to raise it just a hair so you can see maybe a little bit more, but I'm telling you, like, you can see a little bit of that like blooming nonsense that you don't really want to see. So again, that's when you push the local dimming to high. Now, I have not tested if you do it on medium, but we're about getting the most impact right now, and that's why I have it set this way. But there are, on the Hisense, a bunch of different ways you can set it to get different results. They look pretty good here, but again, it's just the Samsung that's coming up just a little bit ahead in these comparisons right now. I mean, if I had to call a winner off of this comparison, just off of what I've seen so far, I would have to give the edge to the Samsung S90F. It's giving me great detail. Some things can be over brightened here and there, but the overall detail is truly undeniable. But color here for the flowers going to the Hisense. So it's like Samsung just barely took this one. And when I say barely, I mean by the hairs of his chinny chin chin, because of details like that. You know what I mean? So it depends, again, on the content that you watch. Now I see a lot of gray black here on the Hisense. I'll open that up so you can see the blooming. It is there. There is a glow around that pin, and I do see it just like that. There's a substantial glow around that. So if you thought you were going to get around that, no, I do still see that, and it does not look appealing. So that is still a factor for anybody who's thinking they can escape that. No. I don't know if maybe we lower down the local dimming, maybe it'll get tighter, maybe it'll get weaker. I don't know. I'll still have to do individualized local dimming tests and things like that. But as far as like optimized settings for the best picture quality, this is just kind of what it is. But in terms of, again, color quality, that's going all day, every day to the Samsung S90F. And I mean, I have to when I look at how rich and how pure all this is. But it's not to say that this is too far behind. This is literally, I'm not joking, just a hair off. And when you're a hair off of something that's more expensive, there's a conversation to be had. Which one is better? Which one do you buy? And ultimately speaking, do what you want. I think if you're after a mini LED at all, you have your answer. The Hisense U8QG all day, every day makes a lot of fucking sense. It just does, given the price point it will eventually drop to, for sure. But at the same time, there is clearly an advantage of the QD mini LED in terms of brightness, but it is also a double-edged sword, as you can clearly see in scenes like this. Raise the ISO up so you can kind of see, like, I don't know how well you can see it, but in the tree line over in this area, I've got some gray happening. And at the bottom here, it's trying to light up those dark trees. And that's where you start to see things get a little hazy. Where over here, it's just crystal clear and dark and inky. And that's what you want in a scene like this. So we have to be fair. And for fairness sake, that's really what it looks like. Again, I'm noticing, raise up my ISO here as high as I can, I guess, so you can see that. Again, in the Ferris wheel, around the Ferris wheel, there's some blooming. There is none of that over here, and I'm noticing it on the water. It's a bit hazy, but big time on the buildings. Again, this is with high on local dimming, so pushing it to the max it could do, and that's just what it's doing. Now, that's Probably because brightness is tied to the local dimming. It's not like separate. So maybe if you lower it, you might get a different result. But just pushing it to get the so-called highest experience out of the local dimming, it's not performing to the level where I would want the black levels to be. But this is why we do these comparisons. So you can see reality where QD OLED is clearly an advantage. Again, when you look at images like this though, you're going to see that the Hisense has a stellar picture quality, and you're not really going to want for anything. You're not going to be like, oh, I wish I had better color, because you've got pretty much the same level of color that you have on QD OLED. And what I can say that's so impressive about this particular model is that usually you have to compromise vibrancy of your quantum dots with these lower end quantum dots, and you did not have that happen here. You have absolutely the high end quantum dot experience out of this, and it is truly impressive. Beyond impressive, to be very honest with you. And I'm not even using the HDR feature on this particular TV. So you gotta let that sink in. As far as colors, I just gotta give the win to the Hisense for this particular example. It's just doing a lot of right, and it looks so freaking good right now. Draws you in, immediately slaps you down, makes you like, you know, it just takes your breath away. It has that impact. The Samsung, not quite as much, but it's still a beautiful picture too. You know what I mean? You can just see a shit ton of color on. I mean, it's a different shade of color. It's not like either one is right or wrong per se. It just looks better, in my opinion, when you have that rich kind of color there coming off of the Hisense. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you're looking at a Hisense where I'm pretty sure most people thought that it would never even be able to compete with the QD OLED level, but it definitely is. Now, in this example, I prefer the look of the Samsung S90F to the right, but the accuracy goes to the Hisense when you really think about what a sky looks like. Hisense is producing a more natural sky if you think about what grass looks like. Samsung is just getting it wrong where this is trending more neon. This is actually more individualized, and you can see a lot more detail in that grass where, again, it just makes more sense. Same can be said about, you know, the overall image quality. It just looks better. Now, that being said, it's not like you can't make the Hisense brighter, because you most certainly can for those people who would want to. Again, I don't know why you would want to do this. I personally would not advise making the Hisense too much brighter, but I'll go in and just try to raise the overall brightness just a hair or so. Peak brightness is on high. We'll put local dimming to medium, and we'll raise our contrast up just a little bit. Because once you start raising contrast, the thing gets crazy bright. But I mean, it's not really a benefit to do it like that. I personally think you should keep your contrast for this set relatively low, because if you don't, you're going to run into some serious issues as far as, you know, all that ugly blooming and crap. I think that's about as high as I want to put it. I've changed the local dimming dynamic so that maybe it gets a little bit better. Maybe we can go back a couple frames in a second or so here and try to see some things. But it has immaculate detail on the Hisense all day, every day. I can't deny Hisense what I'm seeing here. But the Samsung does have the more aesthetically pleasing look, if that makes sense. And again, pause right here. Even with lowering down the local dimming to try to give an advantage somewhere, if I open up my ISO or camera sensitivity to light so you can see a little bit better, there is still going to be blooming around that owl. It's not going to be that strong. Like right now, it's way too strong. Lower it down about here, you can see a glow. You know what I mean? It's not ideal, but it is there, and it is important to talk about it. But I could tell you, I mean, it's mind-blowing, like what's happening on this Hisense. I'll tell you that right now. So what I'll do is I'll go back into my picture settings under the brightness tab, and we're just going to try to adjust local dimming back to high. And as you see, there's clearly like a jump in brightness. If you pay attention to like the owl's cheek here, turning it to medium, this will decrease. And then turning it to the maximum, this will jump yet again. So that's something that I don't like. I don't like when there are features that are so heavily tied and dependent to your brightness experience, or not your brightness experience, to your local dimming. I don't feel like your local dimming should ever affect brightness. It just should affect the dimming zones themselves, but not the actual peak brightness of the TV. And this absolutely affects that. So keep that in mind. Now, that being said, there are some nifty little tricks you can do, where you can go here, for example, into the clearness option, motion clearness, and you can just go up by 1. This will lower the overall brightness and everything. However, it will give you a tightness or refinement around these objects to get it even closer to like a QD OLED. And that's where then you'd want to go back into something like your contrast, okay? And then you'd want to start raising it up. I'd say I wouldn't go too much higher than like 41 on the contrast, just for, anybody who's trying to do this by themselves. But if you want the full breakdown of the settings that I'm using here to make it look this stellar, make sure you join, because this TV would never hit anywhere near this tier without my help. Just for, again, perspective, so you can see where it started from. We'll go here and to the pictures mode, and it started off somewhere like here. Okay, we'll use vivid mode since it's like a bright mode. It's very ugly and washed and gray looking. And then there's the after. I mean, there's very clearly a day and night change happening here. So keep that in mind. Your TV would have looked like that. Yeah, it's bright as all hell, but it doesn't look good at all, versus that where, yeah, that shit looks amazing. And so we're going to continue forward with this comparison to just kind of show you a little bit more. But again, both TVs are hitting damn hard. It's the Samsung that does pull ahead in the color volume range and in the contrast range in this example. Also in this example, the contrast is stronger on the Samsung. So, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it'd be unethical not to give the win to the Samsung S90F. It is clearly ahead of the Hisense for sure. However, the Hisense's detail and clarity and color are like a hair behind this. It's just like a step down from where this is. And you've got to determine on your own how important that is to you. Some people might say, I want the clarity and the color more or less of the Samsung. I just don't want it that exaggerated, that intense. Well, great news, because the Hisense gives you Samsung color if Samsung color was muted down a bit. And I think that's actually one of the biggest selling points to this TV, to see that you are at the Samsung color level, but you get certain things in certain examples like this. Like the frog just looks better on the Hisense to the left right now. Tons more color, tons more detail. What do you sacrifice? Let's raise up that camera sensitivity to light so you can see a little bit more. It's just a tiny bit hazy. I'm noticing it here under the tree. I'm noticing a little bit around the frog. It gets a little bit on the hazier side. But I mean, you've really got to be ultra picky with very high standards, in which case you need to save the extra money then and buy yourself a QD OLED. Because that's where you're not going to have those problems, and you're going to have like the perfect illumination of the frog and everything. But I mean, when you're talking about it's not an OLED, and maybe you don't want an OLED, this is probably about as good as it gets. For anybody thinking Bravia 9, by the way, this blows the Bravia 9 out of the water, okay? From what I'm seeing here, from what I understood and remembered when I was reviewing the Bravia 9, it came nowhere near this level of performance. So do keep that in mind. But there is a bit more in the way of some blooming that I am noticing. Again, in these strawberries here. So these really stress testing scenes like the strawberries, I'm noticing I am seeing some bloom, and I'm not liking it. So where am I seeing it? I do notice it here, and I do notice it around here. So you will have some haloing issues, I would say. It's not really blooming, so to speak. It's blooming, haloing, about the same thing, but you'll notice that from time to time, and that's going to be one of those things that's going to be a deal breaker for some people. Personally, that's a deal breaker for me, which is why I tend to go with the OLED line of televisions, because I don't want to ever see that. Now, keeping in line with running it back a couple of examples, just to see if we can maybe get better, I don't know, a better experience messing around with local dimming. We didn't on the Owl, but we'll try a couple frames back if I can remember where it was. Just trying to get just a little bit better in terms of that black level of performance. The City did really poorly, by the way. Yeah, this was one of the examples where it just did not look as good as QD OLED. Doesn't look bad, right, in this example, but it just doesn't look as good. So if you remember, I turned on the motion clearness. That cleaned up this example. So it's good to see that that is a tech that is viable for that. So you did get closer to what OLED is offering. So I think that's a beautiful thing. You can use that tech. It's giving you that extra sharpness. It's giving you that extra clarity for sure. I'm seeing it. It's damn near on par with the QD OLED, but it is a hair behind, as I said. But in this example here with the Ferris wheel, not so much. It did clean it up. So if we open up our ISO, it's not as dramatic, right? It did clean up a lot of this bullshit. It did clean it up a bit. This is where also you have to be realistic. We are not self-emissive here. So these type of geometry pieces are going to be stress testing on most, not all, but most mini LED TVs. So you got to kind of keep that in mind. Maybe look for one that's a little bit stronger. I know TVs like TCL, they do a really good job with local dimming, especially at the QM8 line. This year, the QM851G, don't know how they do, but TCL's color is likely going to be nowhere near what Hisense is able to produce. Hisense, with their color and their detail, it's like Sony level. So again, that's the one thing that I could give Hisense the credit on, that they've absolutely surpassed Sony in a lot of ways with color and color reproduction. But that being said, I'm going to call this comparison in favor of the Samsung S90F, but it just barely clinched it. As you can clearly see, the image to the left looks amazing now. They trade a lot of blows, and it's going to boil down to what you prefer. And just to recap, it simply is this. If you're somebody that prefers great detail, you're going to want the QD OLED overall. But if you want something that's going to have good color and not as overzealous as the Samsung can be with the brightness and the color, but still has really sharp detail that's almost on par and save some money, then you're going to go with the Hisense. It's just going to make the most sense. Either way you go, you got stellar TVs out of both of these. I can't give either a failing grade or score in terms of comparatively to one another. I still have to review the Samsung S90F by itself and the Hisense, so stay tuned for their respective reviews. But all in all, the win does go to the Samsung S90F, but the Hisense clinching a very, very narrow second place. And I mean, it is narrow as can be. But let me know what you thought about this comparison in the comments down below. Thanks for watching the #1 brand in honesty. And until the next video, I'll see you guys later.